Mech pilots, online. Battletech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In our 24th deployment of BungleTech, my spheroid co-host Michael and I are once again both privileged and honored to be joined by the Rule Master himself, Keith Hann from Catalyst Game Labs, as we review the results of episode 22's BungleTest. We also share some BungleTech news in our extraordinary Proclamation segment, and then we relish the tricky deaths from above attack leveraged by a spider against an Axman in our Battlefield Outcome Report. It's time, MechWarriors. We already put you to the test. Now, sit back and relax in your command seat and get ready to reap the results.
The BungleTech Institute's Department of Sociology would like to once again thank Loremasters, MagnumDanger, and RetroLazer for their generous support of our large-scale research into bungle prevalence and demographics. Now we know a little more about the sphere we live in.
Bonus objective. Extraordinary proclamation. Initiating.
Honorable listeners, welcome to another episode of BungleTech. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. We want to quickly note we've just released version 1.2 of our BungleTech game mode collection. Updates include the addition of a new game mode, Prototype Clash, and the addition of our podcast's official mech, the Bunkers, record sheets. Find a link to download our game mode collection within the description of our podcast. Also, due to the length of our conversation regarding the BungleTest results, for your convenience, because we are customer service-oriented MechWarriors, we've provided a time code for our initial discussion of a few important notes regarding the test, and then the following discussion of the actual results themselves. Find these time codes in the description of our episode. And now, a quick word from our con.
Clan Kodama. Today we welcome two remarkable talents into our family. Technician Chris Cannon and mech warrior Phil Raider Roby have joined our ranks, bringing with them a wealth of skill, dedication, and unyielding spirit. Chris, with his technical prowess, has personally promised me he will ensure that our machines of battle run seamlessly, while Raider, with his battlefield acumen, is ready to lead our charges with valor and strategic brilliance. Together, they embody the essence of the Kodama: strength, unity, resilience, and confidence in their insanity. As we stand together, fortified by their talents and commitment, let us swarm forward with renewed vigor, knowing that with each new member, our legacy of honor and courage only grows. Welcome, Chris and Phil, to your new home in Clan Kodama. Clan strong together!
This is Professor Michael presenting The Sphere We Live In. The transmission of light between media of different densities demonstrates the phenomenon of refraction. In a denser medium, the apparent speed of light slows down, and when a beam of light approaches a boundary at an angle, One edge of the wave will reach that boundary first. This apparent change in speed on one side of the beam causes it to bend, either into a more dense medium or away from a less dense medium. This is why, when looking at a mech standing beneath a lake, it will seem distorted and shift with the movement of the water's surface. This is also the reason why C3 networks are unable to communicate with underwater mechs, since the refraction disrupts tight beam communications it depends on. Now you know about the sphere we live in.
Primary objective, podcast topic segment, initiating.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 24 of BungleTech, a BattleTech podcast. Today is another big day. I know I always say it's a big day, but this is a bigger day than the previous big day because we are here reviewing the results of the BungleTest. Pretty exciting stuff. To do this review, I am once again joined by my stupendously sensual host, Michael. Say hello, Michael.
Hello.
And we are honored to once again be joined by the only man that I've confessed my love to live on this podcast. That is the mastermind, the rule master, the one who understands and sees all, Keith Hann. Thank you for joining us, Keith.
Glad to be here. One hell of a setup. It's all wrong, too.
Is that true? Is you seriously haven't confessed your love to anyone else? I don't believe that.
I'm pretty sure I only said I love you to Keith because it was sort of a weird thing, and then I was like, I shouldn't do this again to another guest.
Podcast HR on the line.
I think I learned on the fly. Maybe I shouldn't confess my love to people live, especially if I'm not going to edit it out. All right, everybody. Okay, so as you guys know, we did a classic BattleTech test called the BungleTest. 50 questions, timed, pretty intense, broken down across different categories of BattleTech. It was released for, was it 2 months total, Michael, about there?
I think it was more like a month and a half.
So we're today going to sit down and go through the data. Because if you remember when I talked about it previously, or when we talked about it previously, I was like, oh yeah, the BattleTech players want the data. So we're going to give you the data.
For certain definitions of the data. But no, so back when we were writing this, Nathan and I poured a small part of our hearts into this, and a good chunk of time into this. And I remember telling Nathan that it was a bunch of work, but if this gives 30 people a fun 30 minutes, then I think it would work out. It would be worth it. And we absolutely demolished that. I did not expect us to have this many people take an interest in our super dumb quiz.
And how many people was that, Michael, in total?
We finished with 326 respondents.
Wowza,
which
Michael.
Is a lot.
That seems like a lot. Keith, does that seem like a lot to you?
Yeah, for a voluntary quiz with no reward, yes. But you did a good job spreading it around. And I mean, I saw the official forum, you posted on Discord channels, things like that. So it had a good reach.
And I'm very excited that so many people decided to give us the time of day.
Yeah, I suspect people didn't anticipate exactly how in-depth this was. They were expecting a BuzzFeed 10 questions to find out what clan you are or something, but no, this was exactly as intensive as we set out for. So when we put it all together, we had a total of 297 hours of human potential was spent on this quiz. But actually, I think that was a slight error, because it turns out that some people just needed to take multiple hours, sometimes days, between different sections. So actually, it was more like 200 hours of question answering time, and then 97 hours of, I assume, recovering from the ordeal.
That is 200 hours of time that people could have spent with the people they love in their lives, being compassionate, practicing self-care, working out, fixing their failing marriage, going for a walk, going, working, volunteering, friggin' picking up litter outside, generally being an amazing human being. And instead, we burned it all, baby. 200 hours of human potential burnt.
At least one respondent gave feedback that they were working on an omelet while they took the test. So, maybe that's a better idea. Do something useful, spend time with your loved ones, and then just do this on the side. Your score will probably suffer, but
I hope you're happy. Cancer was not cured because
it was a vital 200 hours that we were missing.
It was the linchpin to get the friggin' proposal, and that would have the funding that would get that cure, and we took it away.
And they're sloppy on the grant. The money never comes in. Chain reaction. It's all there.
Well, thanks for contributing, everybody.
But hey, we honestly, we had a lot of good feedback. Lots of people left us very nice messages. Some not so nice messages at the end of the quiz. So I think people enjoyed it. So I'm glad we all got to take part in this as one big BattleTech family.
So let's talk about some of the general themes we saw in feedback first before we go a little bit further. So one thing I did notice is that, and I would see people actually message me about this more so than I saw it in the feedback and in the forum, but some people felt a little bit cheated when they would choose like IS as their preference to clan and get Dr. Mark. And some people, when chose clan instead of IS and got Dr. Mark, also sort of complained. And because there were no right answers there, that the first page was not scored. So any of that preference stuff, we just want to say was not scored, and that was a joke. Because if you choose clan or inner sphere in the BattleTech universe, regardless, you're going to lose. That was a thematic choice made by the brilliant Michael.
Yeah, when I was writing those demographic questions, I was sort of just going through and thinking like, well, these don't need to have a score on them, but if they were to show as a correct or incorrect answer, what would be the most annoying thing? And it turns out the system let me have all answers incorrect. So, I put that to use, and apparently people took that to heart. We're now equally hated by the inner sphere and the clan sympathizers.
I think it was bold of you to start with purposely aggravating questions. The mindset in for everybody is there. Okay, people are volunteering their time to do this. Let's tase them right off the start before they get going. Just to get them in the right mindset.
It was a filter question. It was to make sure you had what it really took to get through the rest of this grueling thing. We had to break the respondents down first so we could really get at the meaty interiors that are their BattleTech knowledge.
Yeah, you have to get rid of people with anger issues right
now. Another one that I saw is a lot of people like confused or pointing out like, oh, why did I get this question wrong? And saying that we should have had like explanations for the different answers or like references in the rule book. I agree, that would have been great, but we ran out of time and that would have been a lot of work. Maybe next time.
Come on, guys, trust us. Why aren't you trusting us? What reasons do you have to doubt us, guys? Come on, trust us. Yeah, that was totally smart. It's funny. I didn't actually think about that at all. I don't know if it was mentioned when we were planning it, but I'm like, whatever, People will believe us. No, so, yeah. And yeah, it actually would be good because we wanted to create this also as like sort of a learning tool.
It would have helped if people could actually learn.
I mean, at least they know what's right. They don't know how we got to what's right. But honestly, that would have taken so much more time. And this test took a lot of time to put together. Like to put it into the tool, to think up all the questions. This was not like let's do this in 30 minutes. I thought it would take us 30 minutes, as always. 10 hours later, we got a test. So, yeah.
This was actually the conversation that led to the aforementioned, like, as long as 30 people take this, it was all worth it. That was at our darkest hour when we were like 20 hours into making this quiz. And I was just like, okay, we got to hit publish now. Like, there's nothing else we can do.
So actually, Keith, as the rule master and as someone who did this test, how did you feel the test represented classic BattleTech? like overall, did it touch everything it needed? Obviously, there's so much missing, but at like a high level concept, did this seem like an adequate test to test general knowledge across the entire sphere?
I wouldn't say it didn't do that, because there's just too much to BattleTech to do that, even if you're just talking total warfare, right? Like support vehicle questions, proto-mech vehicle questions. There was what about airships? All that is industrial mechs. There's so much stuff in total warfare, and even if a lot of people don't use it, it's there. And that's no knock on the quiz. It's just you would have had to have been probably twice the size to have captured all that. But it had a reasonable amount of depth. Part of it is, of course, something we'll probably talk about later. Going into the world of advanced rules then expands your scope immensely. So in some ways, it's a bit light on the basic areas, and in some ways, it's way more than anyone is going to use on the advanced areas. But that in itself is reflective for people's scores. A lot of people will do well on the core stuff, bad on the advanced stuff. But we can talk about that shortly, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that was also interesting, I think this is sort of correlating to the explanation, is we got a reasonable amount of feedback with people saying the questions seemed worded badly or there was unnecessary information in there. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that was intentional. We really wanted things to feel like there was misdirection, like you're playing a game at the table. When you're playing a game at the table, there's always more information than you need to make a decision. You need to know what information to filter out. There's also noise, there's time limits, there's all these things. So we really want to simulate that in the questions. So we did throw some messy stuff in there. So for those people that said, yeah, the questions could have been better worded, they were intentionally too much details. Yeah.
And that's the story we're sticking to.
It's not stupid, it's advanced.
Steve from the Mech Bay podcast, I've collaborated with him on stuff before, and on our Black Marauder game mode, for example, and he was doing the test, and he was like, he's a lawyer, so he's really technical with his writing. When he was looking at this, he was like, oh my God, this is giving me flashbacks to when I helped you edit the Black Marauder. There's so many wasted words. He was like, you could tell he was shaking a little bit. Thanks, Steve.
Literally crying and shaking right now.
Good man, Steve. What's another thing we saw come up a lot in the feedback?
Sort of the last thing is I want to shout out all the Mega Mech players who hopped in and take this. I was surprised to see how many folks were like, yeah, I only play Mega Mech and the computer does all the thinking for me. But you took the quiz anyways, and good on you. I appreciate you. You are seen. You are heard. You are no less of a BattleTech player for not trying to jam all of this in your brain. You're probably a better BattleTech player for not jamming all of this in your brain. There's a huge chunk where could fit strategy and tactics, but instead I have rules for satellite uplinks instead because Nathan uses them every single game.
Gotta uplink those satellites, baby.
Mega Mech is interesting that way because it does give you a very skewed idea of what BattleTech is, because you can automate all sorts of stupid things you would never do at the tabletop. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like you said, it does sort of glide over a lot of the rules. So you sort of know how things work, but you sort of don't. It's an interesting, I will do this knowing what the result will be, but you don't know necessarily the fine gradations of it. It makes you probably a wider player, in terms of like a wider breadth of applied knowledge. But I think it does probably make you suffer in terms of understanding certain aspects.
I wonder if it's easier to max min in Mega Mech or max min on the table.
I feel like in terms of like playing the game, the with the rules, Mega Mech probably, but there is a certain element of like meta game of like you can do something so annoying that people refuse to engage with you anymore, and that's winning in its own way, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's been a long time since I've done Mega Mech. I was actually just trying to figure, does it actually show you every time you change your potential action, does it recalculate the targeting modifiers for you? Because if so, then it can definitely help you out that way in terms of min-maxing, right? Because you can always very quickly calculate the optimal thing. But if it doesn't do that, then I imagine be on the same page as a tabletop player.
Yeah, I think it does show you the automatic calculation when you're like clicking on different mechs, but it wouldn't tell you the numbers, the details about your mechs that you're bringing to the table that could abuse specific rules, I think. So to me, it's like the pre-setup, you could max min more outside of Megamech, but maybe the game setup, you could max min easier inside Megamech. Or the gameplay, rather. I don't know. Anyhow, that's a topic for another day. Another episode.
Yeah, another day.
Write it down, Michael. Another episode. Episode 58. That's what it's going to be. Put it in your calendars, everybody. Okay, so before we get into discussing this in more detail, I just want to share a few favorite comments I had that came up that I just think these comments holistically capture what the test felt like for people. So first we have NC Kestrel, who said, "That was miserable. Why did I do this?"
We appreciate your time.
He actually did quite good.
He's the Alpha Strike dev, actually. Joshua Franklin.
Wow.
That's Joshua Franklin. He's the head of Alpha Strike for BattleTech. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. He decided to dive into this.
Yeah, and he scored better than most people, that's for sure. Austin said, "I somehow knew less than I felt I should have and more than I thought I would."
Mission accomplished.
Amazing. Biosteris said, "This sure was a quiz."
Yep.
Warhammer number 1 said, "F this, I'm playing Warhammer."
Fair enough.
That's a great one, too. And then one correction from Aeon Fiji, and this is perhaps the truest wrong that we had in the quiz, is a Teet saying is never cowardly. We called one cowardly. And so he was personally just had to point out that a Teet saying cannot be cowardly because it is an honorable Capellan mech. And they are never cowards, as we know. They are honorable and forthright. So my apologies. But anyhow, that's the vibes. That's the vibes of the tests, everybody.
I want to say, anyone, if you were unsatisfied with the quiz, reach out to us, BungleTech podcast email. It will send you your money back, a voucher for...
They're going to charge us opportunity cost. We already showed that cancer was not cured. They're going to somehow find some way to bill the opportunity cost to us. It's too much.
But I did want to make one offer. I should have cleared this with you, Nathan. But there are a few people I noticed that said that they didn't get their results, or you didn't have a chance to review them, or like the page closed or something on you. If you reach out to us and let us know what your name was, or some way to identify your sheet, we can probably get you your results if you're really missing them. And if you want to go back and study so that you're ready for next time. ...
Ready for next time. We got to do it again. People liked it.
People love it.
I mean, that was miserable. Why did I do this? That type of
They crave suffering. That's why they listen to us.
All right. So before we get into the results, we're going to talk about the mistakes we made when we released the test. Because we said we would, because we're honest and forthright, just like the Capellans. So let's go over that really quick. Okay, so there's actually, when we released the test, there was 50 questions. And this sounds worse than it is, guys, okay? Just, it's okay, take a deep breath. It's not that bad. Technically, 7 of the questions out of 50 were not 100% accurate. Okay, let's talk about the wrongs, because there are a few that were pretty blatantly wrong and some that were not blatantly wrong. So there's a question about an urban mech that shoots an Arrow 4 missile at the cowardly saying, it came up again. It was located on the battlefield 2 map sheets away. The question was how many turns until the missile hits its target. We said the answer was 0, because there is actually, in the books, it sort of doesn't define what a battlefield is. So we said it was a battlefield 2 map sheets away. It's still like a consistent battlefield. So if it's on the same battlefield, we thought there was no travel time. But there was actually a clarification in 2018 by Keith Hann, the man who's with us right now, who clarified this in the forums that someone had to go to, who was actually Lorian Sunrider, MechWarrior Lorian Sunrider, who ended up sharing that, no, it should actually be 1.
I was trying to remember, actually, did I ever get that into errata? Because, that's 2018. And that's the problem, of course, when there's so many prints of the books, you may own an older one. And so even though it's been technically out for years, do you have the later printing?
Yeah, I think I had a new one. I don't think that one is out yet because it's such a weird, obscure thing, because it's about like the definition of a battlefield. You know what I mean? I don't think anything actually defines a battlefield in the books. That's not like a key word, because usually it's map sheets, but anyhow.
So is that how it's supposed to work, Keith? It's supposed to be like per sheet, per like paper page?
Yeah, because like Nate was just saying, there is no such thing as a battlefield as a rules terminology other than what you're playing on, which means it's fine, but it's not very meaningful because it can be anything from a half a sheet that you've taken one sheet, torn it in half to I've got that tennis court from the Battle Mech manual to play on, and that's the battlefield as well. So yeah, it had to be defined in terms of standard BattleTech map sheets. After this, I'm going to go actually and check and see and make sure I made it in print or not.
Cool. Yeah, look at this. Changes on the fly, everybody. The test has resulted in something.
The test has results from 6 years ago.
I like how that's like that. That's what Lorian brought up as evidence against it. Because then he started asking around. He's like, no, this is the decision. I'm like, oh, damn. Cool. So there's that. So that is an example of a question being wrong. Okay. Another question was wrong was there's an Atlas and a Kodiak and they're punching each other. You need the target number. We said the Atlas's target number was 5. The Kodiak's was 3. Atlas's was actually 5 and the Kodiak target number was 4. And that was literally just because I didn't do the Gator calculation correctly, everybody. So sorry. Lorian, Sunrider, also discovered that one. This was all within the first few minutes of the test. Keith found the next one, which was when damage is inflicted to internal structure, when are critical hits resolved? We said immediately once the weapon attack damage has been resolved, but it's more true to say immediately once the weapon's damage grouping is resolved. Because what happens if it's an LRM with multiple clusters, right, Keith?
Yeah, or an SRM is the classic one, right? Yeah, so you have to resolve each cluster, not the entire weapon, all the clusters at once. If you hit with a SRM warhead and it does the damage, then you roll the critical hits, then you resolve the critical hits, and you do everything. Then you move to the next single missile. So an SRM2 could be broken up, and now these even is enough to break it up into meaningful game-altering chunks.
If you don't mind talking history for a sec, like that seems unusual to me. Like most games that I know of now, you try to like lump things together for like fast movement, but BattleTech seems to have lots of like interruptions while you're going through the flows. Is that like by design? Is that just how it's always been, sorta?
It's interesting. Questions of design and original intent are really difficult with BattleTech because there's literally no one left from the original crew, right? They've all moved on to other things. A bunch of them have actually died. So and then even when they're around, we get the chance to talk to, say, Boy F. Peterson or Jordan Wiseman, things like that. They often say, I don't remember. I was like drinking and we were playing all night, and that was forever ago. How the hell would I know that? We as players immersed in it really overvalue the long-term memory effects of what this. It has to mean everything to you. Why do you remember your kids' names and not this?
It just kind of seems right. When the missile hits, that's when the explosion happens, and then the next missile hits. So it works.
Certainly, when this came out, things were a lot more granular. I remember with this being designed around 83 and then in 84, people had a lot more of a tolerance for interruptions, more granular gameplay. And I'm always thinking BattleTech was a beer and pretzels game of the time. It was considered a simple game then. Now it's considered very granular. But one thing we've definitely learned, without getting into too much detail, I'm working on the new edition of BattleTech. That's been mentioned in like a Sarna interview and a couple of things like that. But we started looking at a lot of this stuff to go, okay, well, why is this here? Why isn't this here? Why does it do it this way? And one of the things you learn really quickly with BattleTech is actually how, despite seemingly maybe clunky on the surface, how robust a lot of this stuff is. If you make even a small change, it's not just, oh, well, now it's faster. It's automatically better. And like you remove elements of gameplay that are really meaningful. You really change a lot. So something like that, yes, you could resolve it more quickly by doing it as a big lump sum. You'd also completely remove the unique rules effects that cluster weapons give you by being able to do that kind of stuff. So it's really good to do that. It lets cluster weapons do something that no other weapon type does. And so it's really important to preserve that and do that properly.
So what's interesting about this question, or the fixing this little change here. So the first questions, the clarification definitely, with how it was set up with the other options, would lead people to making a wrong decision and getting graded inappropriately. This one, with the damage inflicted, with the options presented, it was still, I think, right enough that it wouldn't have impacted people's scores. So it was a good clarification, important to have, but not a score impacting one.
We're like your high school teacher saying, like, choose the most correct answer.
Yeah, we should. That's funny. We should have actually specified that in everything. Then nothing would have been wrong. The next one was, we had a question that involved an Orion, a Thug, and a Prone Bunker. And we changed the name of the bunker to an actual mech name because many people were interpreting a bunker as a building bunker.
You fools.
And so then it would get -4 and all that stuff. And this is one thing that I found funny about the test, because a few people would question some questions like, can a spider even jump this far? Is there even a valid variant? Or can an atlas even move this far? Is there even a valid variant? The fact that people started like looking at variants and like going so into the weeds.
The underwater weapons can't fire because they're missiles. That variant has missiles on it and they can't fire underwater.
Exactly. Like things like that, where it sort of steps outside the realm of the question, visualizing it actually on the table was pretty interesting. So anyhow, we changed the name from bunker to another mech name to no longer confuse people.
Yeah, I was one of the people who got confused by that. It's like calling a mech infantry platoon.
I know. But now I want to name a mech an infantry platoon. Or aerospace fighter. Dropship. It's the dropship. No, the mech.
It's something created just to mess with the clan bidding process. Or like, I bid 5 men with rifles, and men with rifle is each 200 super assault.
5 men with rifles. That's insane. You'll never take it. I'm totally giving the bid. No, they're each 200-ton mechs. You don't. It's our new variant. That's crazy. Next one was actually one regarding critical damage, which it was when damage is inflicted to internal structure, when are critical hits resolved? And we had to add a clarification of when damage is inflicted to internal structure and it does not result in a location destruction, when are critical hits resolved? Because technically, the behavior is slightly different based on that. That was some feedback from a guy named Angerman5000 on Reddit, who was not angry at all when they gave the feedback. So thank you for that feedback.
And so what exactly is it? Like, if the location is destroyed, do you not resolve criticals at all? Is that it?
No, because then there's the ammo explosion potential and all that stuff, right? Like the Omega bungle. So if the location is destroyed, you got to see if there's ammo in the location, and then it would pause the damage being resolved and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, and you have a chance to inflict a critical, and then if it resolves to an explosive location, then you do that. If it doesn't, nothing happens.
Okay.
So it just is like a little sub-step that it sort of missed, potentially. So it adds some clarification. It did make the answer technically incorrect, so.
The best kind of incorrect.
Yes, technicalities. Next one, a critical hit is rolled on a location with no valid critical slots. What happens? We changed it to no valid critical hit slots at the start of the phase. What happens? Because there can be instances in which all your crit slots have been crit out and you still have more crits coming into that area. And I'm correct, Keith. In that situation, they would resolve on the slots that have already been resolved, right? Because it's like simultaneous, they don't transfer in. There's some different behavior I forgot about.
Yeah, it's one of them triggers crit transfer, and the other one, all excess crits are lost. So it is very important to define, were there any slots intact at the start of the phase? Because it completely changes gameplay again. If you alter that, then you might have, depending on how you do it, you could have cascading crit transfer and everything explodes way more often than it should.
So all those above questions, so those 6 rule mistakes were corrected within like the first 2 hours of the quiz. So that was in with like the first 30 respondents. So it didn't really impact the data that much. And as I said, most of them, the correct answer was there was still an answer that if you knew the correct answer was close enough that you would guess it.
That was also a Reddit correction, right?
That was a Reddit correction. Oh yeah, from Issa Bison. Issa Bison. It just reminds me of like Jar Jar Binks. I'm sure they don't want me to say that. Issa Bison.
I know that name. He posts a lot of rules questions on the official forums. So I think he does some programming for one of the various BattleTech apps. So it's not surprised that he's very particular about precise wording because he has to translate it into computer logic. Same thing with MegaMech. We get a lot of very good rule corrections from the MegaMech devs because they're like, I am programming this and I can't use your loosey-goosey sort of vague wording as to how, the computer doesn't understand. I need to be absolutely precise. So MegaMech and other app developers have been really useful in getting the rules crystal clear, like the wording very precise.
And if you remember the Omega Bungle, when I was checking it, because I found that pretty much every player that was playing tabletop that was really experienced was making the Omega Bungle mistake. Everybody was. But MegaMech was doing it right. MegaMech did the proper resolution. They paused the damage resolution in like a torso destruction. They didn't just pass it all the way through, which is sort of interesting, which is cool. So like, look at MegaMech. It's just, those guys are just so smart. So much smarter than friggin' tabletop players. There, I said it. Actually, we should have said if people normally play by MegaMech and see how, obviously they would have scored worse, but.
That'll come in BungleTest 2.
BungleTest 2. MegaMech specific. We can talk about the MegaMech interface. Just quiz,
No,
where is this menu?
No, absolutely not.
And then see how the classic, it's perfect. Then we test we see how
don't
bad the
use
classic players are on
MegaMech.
table.
How are we supposed to write a quiz about it?
Yeah, I'll figure it out. I've used it before. Come on. I'm an expert at everything. Okay, and the next question, this one was interesting because all those ones were resolved straight away. This one lasted till 2 weeks till the end. And the question was, when an ammo explosion is triggered from heat effects, what is the immediate result? And the answer we had that was correct was the ammo bin with the highest total damage value explodes. But it's actually the ammo bin with the highest damage value per shot explodes. So if you had an AC-20 with 1 shot left, and then you had an SRM, 2 with 50 shots left, the SRM-2 would not blow. The AC-20 would blow because the ammo is bigger and more explosive, I guess. Bigger means more explosive. So that was something that passed all the way through. It was still, once again, this was an example where of the answers available, this one was the most correct. So I don't think this dissuaded anybody, but I'm surprised it made it this far. And that was the other Josh on Discord that shared that with us. So thank you for that. I can't believe that one made it all the way through. That's insane.
And once again, if anyone feels that they were robbed out of the score they rightfully deserved because you got through in an early version of the test and you were misled by these clear and obvious rule mistakes, reach out to us and I will personally update your score based on what it should have been all along.
Michael will personally do it.
I will personally go and update your certificate.
Good man. You're going to give them I guess they do get a little certificate, right?
I don't think they do, actually.
I think you should offer a phone call and apology as well.
Let's not get crazy here.
No, come on, Mike. And a handshake.
Listen, you get a generic apology and you get a rubber stamped correction. That's as much as I can do.
We'll sign the apology with Keith Hann's signature. Keith, can you send us your signature and I'll just staple it in there? It'll mean something to people.
Yeah, I'll make it a boss stamp. You can just send that over. Stamp whatever you want.
Okay. We've already talked too much. And that's just the mistakes we made on the quiz. Let's actually get to the findings, the juice, the data. All right, let's go. What were our interesting findings when looking at the results, Michael? Take it away.
All right, so starting from the top, we conferred every single person who completed the quiz with an honorary degree. We awarded 102 minors in bungling, which means you're able to do, a respectable amount of bungling, but it's not your specialty. 157 bachelors of bungling, which was the sort of the bulk of people, people who have studied and, you're ready to go out and bungle at your own tables. 57 people received a prestigious Masters of Bungling. So you can really teach others in how to bungle as much as possible. And we had an ignoble 3 people who received Bungler Purists as their reward because they scored significantly below random chance. So congratulations. Truly, you are the bungliest among us. 6 people didn't, they were counted as social bunglers. They, answered almost all of the questions correctly, but at least got a few wrong, so that the rest of us felt better with our answers. And then one person missed the whole point of the quiz, got a perfect score, and we dubbed them an inverse bungler for missing the point. And I think that was a friend of the podcast, right?
Yes, that was the Loremaster Denham Hardman from the Mech Bay podcast. If anyone's going to get 100% on this, it sort of makes sense that he did. And yeah, he did the test, and he said that there was one question that he had enough time where he's like, I'm going to double check that my answer is correct. And he did, and it turned out to be the correct answer anyhow. So he 100%ed it, man.
And I think he
friggin' Denham,
did.
Man.
He also mention that there was one of them that almost caught him, but it's something that they discussed at his local game store recently. So he had it top of mind.
And actually, I think that's a question that many people got wrong, which was the stabilized laser design quirk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a tricky one. It was one of our trick questions, but he got it right. So yeah, one inverse bungler. And so I think the scores were inverse bungler was 100%, social bungler was 80% to 99%, minors in bungling was 79 to 60, right?
Yeah.
And
It
then
was
bachelors
20%
of bungling was
increments.
59 to 40. Yeah, and then so basically, if you were a social bungler, 80% or above, which is pretty dang good. Masters of bungling, I think was it 30? No. Anyhow, we'll talk about the scores. But obviously, the higher the reward, like a masters, means you did
a lot of bungling. No, you did better. You bungled a lot.
You did better. You did better at bungling,
in our hearts.
Because the goal was to bungle.
Score.
Yeah. So really, the person that we have the most disdain and disrespect for is Denham Hardman, because he did the exact opposite what this podcast is about. Dang you, Denham. Dang you. That's right. I brought up my dang. That's how serious I am. Do these results surprise you, Keith? This high-level breakdown.
Again, it's kind of tricky. This is something I want to talk about with even the format of it. Because it's a mix of standard rules and advanced rules, I can't say I had like a preset idea. I was kind of curious actually myself. I have no idea how many people play various advanced rules. We just don't have any way of knowing. I mean, certainly TAC Ops sells well, but then again, so does Strategic Operations Advanced Aerospace rules and that Interstellar Operations volume with all of the mass combat rule sets. Like, the books sell. That doesn't necessarily mean people play it stuff. I mean, this is the same way I think of like Pathfinder Adventure Paths, where a whole bunch of people buy them just to read rather than ever run them. So yeah, it's hard to say. I had very few expectations outside of the core rules questions, where I expected people would do reasonably well, but at the same time, like you said, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this more, you did throw in some red herrings and things like that to mess people up. So even then, it's not a straight test of 100% pure rules knowledge. It's also an ability for you to do careful reading. So it's things, all sorts of levels being tested here, which made it interesting.
Well, on the topic of the worst scores, 2 people actually tied with 14%, which is 7 out of 50. And one of them commented at the end of the test, "This is why I let computers think for me." Very wise. So I loved that.
And on average, people spent just shy of 37 minutes, 36 minutes and 50 seconds answering the actual questions, which is 69% of the total allotted time that you had. So, good use of time, everyone. We're proud of you all.
So that means next time we can make it even more time intensive.
There were some people who blew through these questions, and there were some people who really made sure they used up their time. I was always one of those people in class who left early. I just answer all those questions, leave.
So we literally had, on this topic, we had some people complete the test in like 5 minutes, which there's no way you could read these questions in 5 minutes. Some people are just like, I got to power through this test. I got to get this test done. And Michael, you were saying, I was trying to see if there's any correlation between length of test and score. And you said there wasn't really any, right?
Well, Nathan asked me. He's like, "Hey, can you do some statistics on this?" And I'm like, "I have a mathematics degree. Of course I can." So for this one, I'll tell you what. I scatter plotted those suckers. I did a linear regression. There's an R value of 0.2%. So there is absolutely no correlation. How long you took on the test has absolutely nothing to do with your score.
That is absolutely insane.
I mean, I find that weird because you think 5 minutes. Just most of the guys who, in a university exam are just going ACDC, ABBA. They're doing ACDC, ABBA, like just to get through it and randomize. And like, I don't know nothing.
But even those weren't our lowest scores. Like the lowest scores were not the people who took 5 minutes, because the people who took 5 minutes ended up at about 25%. There were people who got even lower scores, and we're proud of them.
Carefully and methodically incorrect.
The well thought out type of incorrectness.
One of the lowest scores was about 9 minutes, and one of the lowest scores was about 33 minutes. So you people out there, you are the bungliest among us. Truly, we all aspire.
That is such a fun result. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It really doesn't. But that's what the data says, everyone. Michael's the data guy. He did the data. He doesn't make mistakes. I make mistakes. So obviously, we can trust what he's saying here. All right, well, let's go into the average scores across sections here. I'm pretty interested about this.
So on average, people got 26 answers correct, or 52%. Breaking it down into sort of the different sections, because we sort of talked about how, boot camp at the beginning had like some basic rule questions, mostly basic rule questions-ish. And then, the other sections sort of went into different, more esoteric areas. So the easiest section was boot camp, where we tried to write basic rule questions, and that was a 62% on average. Rumble Seat and Spec Ops were pretty much tied at 50 and 51% average scores. And then War Games, where we pulled out all of the stops for questions about every esoteric unit type we could find, had only a 34% average. So that was a significant drop.
Which to me is interesting, because if we remember, so yeah, boot camps, you say that's the basic. Rumble Seat was like niche rule interactions of basic rules still, but very niche things that would come up on the table. Spec Ops was the advanced rules. War Games was still stuff in Total Warfare, but it was just using units like, tanks or aerospace or
Wing and ground
VTOLs. Yeah, little things like that. So how do these numbers surprise you, Keith?
No, I didn't really have anything there either. Like, again, I didn't have a real baseline of experience there. I have no idea. My experience is really skewed being the guy who answers rules questions. So it's like being a police officer, where you just kind of, I would imagine those guys, everybody lies all the time because they spend their entire job getting lied to by everyone. Similarly here, nobody knows the rules. All you do is deal with people who don't know the rules. So, but I'm aware of that at that level. Like, no, there's some people who know the rules. They just don't come to the forums then and ask questions. But yeah, I know I have a skewed idea of how things work, and so I'm very aware that, like, I don't really know what the wider world of BattleTech is. There's skill levels and knowledge of the rules, stuff like that. If anything, I'd love to know more about that. So I just went to do it with an open mind and really kind of curiosity.
Yeah, I think the takeaway from this is BattleTech players need to play with more weird unit types. Get more submarines and chronoplans in your battles. It's the only way to prepare for the next Bungle test.
And then we'll switch it all up. All right. What about the demographics? So those are all our scoring information. What interesting stuff did we have about the demographics?
Yeah, so we sort of had those, like, for fun questions at the top. Finding out a little bit about you as a player, having a little bit of fun. And so we went through and tried to see sort of, how did different groups do? How much did your knowledge impact different things? Once again, Nathan asked me to do stats, so I analyzed these with the tried and true method of jamming every dimension into a one-way ANOVA and then listening to anything that the computer told me was significant and reporting that as a result, which, as far as I'm concerned, is scientifically valid. So, first question, we had experience level. This is probably the one that we like hypothesized would have the highest impact on your results. And it did. We had 30 people who reported themselves as elite players, and they averaged 61%, also the only perfect score. We had 95 veterans who averaged 60%, and that's where all of our 6 social bunglers were. We had 125 people who reported themselves as ordinary, regular players, and they averaged 51%, pretty much bang on the average. 72 respondents who described themselves as green, but they still had a respectable 41% in their results. And then we had a brave 4 respondents who answered, "What's BattleTech?" And they averaged a significantly below average 35%. And that's where all of the bungle purists with their delightfully low scores ended up.
I definitely had expectations of this one, though. When I saw this, like, oh, this is excellent. This is a Dunning-Kruger question if I've ever seen one. Right? I was fully prepared to this not to match up because people always overrate their own abilities. But so I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Good job. I Dunning-Krugered myself. The sense of, I don't know. I just thought people would report themselves as being much better than they actually were. But it seems to be that. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can measure it kind of concretely. You can say, I have been playing for 20 years or whatever, and have a feeling, okay, if that doesn't make me elite, what does? And it does seem that correlates to doing good in the test.
And if anything, maybe there were a few people who underreported them. Like I say, the 6 people who had the highest non-perfect score, they all reported themselves as veterans, not elite. So you 6 out there, you have more confidence in yourself.
And that is, interestingly enough, one of those Dunning-Kruger things I think it actually came up in that test where people who have ability tend to underrate their ability, whereas being ignorant, part of being ignorant is not knowing how bad you are, and so you rate yourselves as quite high. So that seems to work out.
Mm-hmm. And I like I said, I jammed this through an ANOVA, and the ANOVA said the between groups difference was significant, a P of less than 0.01. So it does, in fact, your self-reported experience level does impact your score on our test.
And here's the thing I want to say to green players, because the What's BattleTech players, I'm not going to really consider you right now. Why are you here? I mean, welcome to the family. But the green players and the elite players, elite average 61%, green average 41%. Okay, I know that it's a very hard test, and that means that technically, elite would be like right 50% of the time more, but it's not as big as a gap as you'd imagine. Like you'd imagine the elite would be something like 85%. Like this is a 20% difference between the average of their score results. And it might feel like at the table, you don't know stuff as well as other people, but maybe they're just more confident than you. And they're really wrong too. Can you relate to that, Michael? Has that ever happened? No, it hasn't.
Or maybe it says something about our test. I don't know. That's possible too. Okay, so we had 82 clan sympathizers, which averaged 50% on their score. 243 inner sphere devotees, who averaged 53%. But ANOVA says it is not a significant difference between the two. And then we also had 1 independent mercenary who did not report affiliation with either of them, and they scored an 80%. So, smarty pants.
Damn, he sidestepped the question.
Yeah. I didn't know it was possible. I guess that one wasn't mandatory.
Yeah, interesting. Look at that. Hacking the system, man. The only person who wasn't angry about that decision. So we know that clanners can't read. Okay? We accept that. We know that. Yet despite clanners not being able to read, our average score was still 50%. Inner Sphere just beat us by 3%, despite our lack of ability to read, which proves that we are superior. We've not had the fancy upbringing of books that the Inner Sphere has had, and we still are so close to tying you in a game of intelligence. There you go. Our culture is superior. Anyhow, on to you, Michael.
All right. So this next one is one of my favorite questions about how did you learn to command a mech? About half of the people, 165 of you, said that you read the books. Fair enough. Knowledge is power. About a quarter of you, or 83 people, reported learning from your friends. You know, that's one of the strengths of BattleTech. We're all one big family. We support each other. About an eighth that learned at your friendly local game store. That was about 40 people, you know, building that BattleTech community. 10% said that you just entered this world knowing everything you needed to already. And 6 very special people learned from us, you poor bastards. It turns out the scores are pretty consistent regardless of where you learned, about 51 to 53%, except for the people who learned from us. They averaged 30%.
Michael, don't slander us. Take it back. Relook at the data. No, it's impossible.
I ran the ANOVA on it, and it said that the groups were significantly different. But doing a little bit of a further analysis, it turns out all of the groups are about the same. There are no differences unless you learned it from us, in which case you were significantly worse at the quiz.
I learned it from you. I like the idea of that 10% that came out, just like Mama, Goo Goo, Baba, PPC. Just get right to the world.
Yep. And they did just fine. You know, the innate skill. I guess we should have been more specific. You know, maybe we can find these people and like interview them and find out, were you just born with like the basic rules and then you had to study the advanced rules, or like maybe as you like matured, then your knowledge of the advanced rules slowly developed?
Oh, I wouldn't underestimate the just screwing with you factor. I mean, you put that in there. If you put in a question that's, you know, one of the options is, I learned it from a giant sentient bowling ball. People will select that, right? It's there. So why not?
Ridiculous. Yeah. Our listeners are honest people.
Yes. They would not. Don't slander our listeners, Keith. Jeez.
I found this one really interesting question just because of the number of people. The majority of people said they learned it from the books, which blows my mind as someone who's constantly editing the books to try to make them more clear, because, oh man, that's got to be difficult. I mean, we release beginner products, obviously, to help specifically do it that way, but still, it's a social game. You need players. You're usually, I don't know how many people are just randomly wandering in, buying a product off the shelf that they think is neat, trying it themselves, buying it themselves, learning themselves, and then going to play games, which is how I kind of interpret that one. I would have thought it would have been a vast majority. You've learned from your friends, like, hey, Bob, we got this cool thing. It's got giant robots. You should give this a try. I mean, that's how I was introduced to it. You would probably then get into it. You grab the books, you start reading yourself. But for me, this is sort of, how did you get into the game as a question? Maybe I'm just reading it differently than they did. But the idea of getting it purely from the books, or majority from the books, struck me as really weird.
It surprised me too. But if we combine the friends with local game store, which they'd be teaching them at the same time, makes it a little bit closer. But still, I thought that it would be about 50% learned from friends. I didn't think many people would be brave enough to just dive into the books, but I guess we're technical players for a reason. We like these technical games. We like our document analysis. We like to read stuff.
I did do that a lot with the lore, for sure. I mean, I spent my second ever paycheck entirely on BattleTech stuff. And I went to an old game store in Edmonton that closed down a few years ago, finally. And they had mountains of old stuff. And I just bought it all, tons of it. I played very little after that point. Like, they had an initial summer of playing a bunch that inspired me to buy all this stuff. But I was reading mountains and mountains and mountains of lore for years before I found another regular group again. So I certainly did it lore-wise, learning from the books, rather than having people, being with a community that was constantly bouncing this lore stuff back and forth. It was all research.
Mm-hmm. All right. And while we're in here, I do want to say that the people who learned it from us are the only people who correctly, appropriately feared the Kodama as one of the most dangerous creatures in the verse. 66%, which was 4 people, correctly identified the Kodama as the most dangerous creature in the verse, compared to a mere 42% of overall respondents.
Fear the Kodama. We might not have knowledge, but we do have wisdom.
I've done as much as I can to raise awareness of the dangers of wildlife in the universe, but it's just not taking, apparently.
Thank you, Professor Michael. At least our listeners know. But it should have been 100%. It should have been, yeah. Anyhow, that's okay. They're learning. They need to experience it firsthand. That can be a future Patreon prize. Every year we'll ship someone to a random jungle and surround them in Kodama for a few hours and see how.
We will mail a Kodama right to your door.
We'll teach you the fear you need.
All right, and last one of the demographic questions, also a really interesting one, I think, is how many advanced rules do you play with? And sort of maybe as expected, 72% say they play with a few, the ones that they like. 16% said they play basic rules only, no advanced rules. 10%, amazingly, possibly unbelievably, 10% report being true bunglers who play with every advanced rule like us. And I don't know if this is, again, possibly people over-reporting, limitations of self-reporting and all that, or maybe just not like really truly knowing the implications. I'm terrified to imagine that 10% of people actually perhaps do play with all of the rules as we do, but supposedly that is what the people say. And then an improbable 2% report playing advanced rules only, no basic rules. But they also scored well above average at 61%. So the ANOVA says how many advanced rules you play with was a significant factor in your overall score. Maybe not surprising.
You should take that data to heart, Keith, because really what it's saying is that the basic rules are the problem with BattleTech, not the advanced rules.
Oh, sure.
Get rid of all the basic rules, make it advanced only. Like I was saying, you can only attack someone. You can only move backing up hills or sprinting. Yeah, that's I think what the change BattleTech means.
You can only get bogged down in swamps, but you can't move there somehow unless you're, that would be the wildest game. Well, I don't know. Actually, it would be a very boring game because you can't fire at each other. What would you do? Just sitting there while off-board artillery strikes at each other?
Discounting the advanced rules only. What do you think of the other ones? Like how again, no expectations, but what did you think when you saw
That's exactly what I expected. BattleTech is that's exactly it. There's a few that always come up, like for instance, floating criticals, right? That's the huge one. Most people like that rule, and you see again and again. People should just make this standard. This should just be standard. Everyone has, I'd say, 1 to 4 or 5 rules. I think out of that giant sea of TAC ops stuff that they like. Like this is good. This should probably be core gameplay. That may change from table to table, but I think floating crits would be remarkably consistent. There's going to be a couple others. I wasn't surprised to see that. And similarly, basic rules only. I would have expected probably higher, but I guess I underestimated then even how popular some of those core basic advanced rules are. I'm just trying to think what would be the most popular ones. Like, we've gotten to the point now that we've picked specific colored die for sprinting. For the movement dice. So I guess sprinting is quite popular, and that's in the BMM. But that could be something as simple as enhanced flamers from the Battle Mech manual.
Yeah.
That's technically, it's an optional rule, but that would be enough to say, hey, yeah, sure, I play with some advanced rules. But you could have even just one of those, and you'd have to check that category.
Plus, if you're like really only just doing the bare minimum, you've just got your BattleTech intro box or whatever, you're maybe not in the like BattleTech podcast-averse, responding to weird quizzes.
I don't think there's a lot of people who limit themselves that much. I mean, I don't mean that in a negative sense, but there's an entire universe of stuff. I'm only using this much. I'm cutting out the rest. You eternally hear about that almost proverbial 30-25 grog. It's just, I only do this. It is only mechs. It is only 30-25. There are no advanced rules or weapons. Final destination. Right? These guys are a legend in the community. But at least, and maybe that equates to, as you said, also, I don't know what a podcast is, or I've never used a web survey. We still communicate via fax machines and Western Union telegrams stapled to the ass of a brontosaurus, right? Like there may be no advanced technology for these people in their world. Yeah, it certainly, at least in this, doesn't seem to be a big demographic.
And the one thing that I wonder actually is, because as you say, like with like the 10% people saying we play with all advanced rules, that doesn't surprise me. What surprises me more...
A lot of those are outright contradictory. You can't use advanced rules. They think they're advanced rules. They don't mesh together.
They mesh perfectly well. It's a masterpiece of a game. Keith, don't speak about yourself that way. You're perfect. But the 16% play with basic rules is like, it's hard to really know what is basic rules because, like you say, floating crit, advanced flamers, these things are at your table. Like I think most people are going to play with floating crits, for example, and they just think it's like how the basic game works. So I would anticipate that is slightly lower.
And there might be a bit of a generational gap here. You know, if you learned from, you know, if you remember buying TAC Ops as the book with all the advanced rules, you'll probably have a different perspective than if you learned from the Battle Mech manual and it had several optional rules in there called out as optional rules. Those may not seem like advanced rules to you if they're in that book.
Yeah, that's a good point. And similarly, if you're learning from friends, if they're your gateway into the universe, and you're not a book person, you're just a player. I want to play. I'm not here to learn rules. I think about it like board game night. There's always the one guy you toss the rule book to. Okay, figure this out and teach us. If the guy, the rules gateway, I'd call him, is someone who uses floating crits and he's teaching you the game, then that's a basic rule because you've never really dug into it beyond that level.
And floating crits are an amazing rule. I just love floating crits. I feel like that's one of the basic rules of BattleTech that doesn't make sense to me is the non-floating crits. How like you can only, it just feels like your center torso has holes in it randomly. You know what I mean? It's a weird thing. So the floating crits make so much more sense to me. Holes everywhere, random holes everywhere. That's what I want. I want holes all over my mechs, just not in my center torso. So, we also did a little bit of look at the experience level across sections, so how the different experience levels would score across sections. And I found something of huge statistical significance that I'm going to call out right now. And that is that essentially, in general, if you were an elite would do better than a vet would do better than a regular would do better than a green. But with only two outliers, in general, elites did worse than vets in two categories. And that is the rumble seat and the spec ops categories. In those two categories, they did a significant 0.002. How many zeros is it, Michael?
just 0.2%. Just a significant, statistically insignificant 0.2% difference.
So a significant 0.2% difference, and then a significant, statistically 0.8% difference in spec ops. Hugely significant difference. Right, Michael?
We ran the numbers. They are not significant. I'm giving the referee out of bounds call right now. I'm waving my hands if you can hear that.
I hear nothing, so it doesn't count.
Well, I guess it's valid. Science done.
But that being said, even if it isn't statistically significant, what I find interesting about this is the trend moves upwards for everyone else, but it doesn't for the elite and the vet. It's like tied. So take that, elite. You think you're so good? Guess
Brush
not.
up on your advanced applications of basic rules and basic applications of advanced rules.
Exactly. All right, let's get to more meat. What do we have here next,
there's not too much more. You know, we're picking through the bones of the demographic stuff. I did find that inner sphere players were a little bit more likely to learn from reading books. About 53% of them liked books compared to 42% of the clanners.
Clans are like, how do I eat this?
As Nathan pointed out, these are all, in fact, probably incorrect answers, mistaken answers, because clanners can't read.
There are pictures in the books, Michael. There's pictures and flowcharts for the clanners. So we just like deduce it via the pictures, and some pages have like more words on them. So we're like, okay, this must be a complicated part of the game. That's how we learn.
And, the clans were a little bit more likely to report being born with innate knowledge, which, again, I guess the clan breeding program is working.
Yes. This is scientific and concrete. Amazing. Amazing. I didn't want to, one of my dreams in life was for this quiz to somehow prove scientifically, unquestionably, that clanners are superior to inner sphere. I never thought it would happen, and it has happened. So thank you. Thank you, world. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. And Keith, you're a loyal clanner too, right? Say yes.
One answer doesn't get me shot.
Depends who's holding the gun, I guess. All right. Next. These ones are fun. The top 5 questions that people did the best on.
First, a quick honorable mention. This one just barely didn't make the top 5, but I wanted to mention it because someone called it out about where it was one of the diagram pictures where there was a blackjack shooting at a Zeus, and someone said that they got confused because there was a picture of a different mech that was a Zeus, and if there was any mistake made there, it was made by Megamech, because I specifically chose those 4 opponent mechs as W, X, Y, and Z, and I found mechs that were named with all of those letters. So the Y was probably like a
Yeoman.
It wasn't a yeoman. Maybe it was a yeoman. Anyways, it was a Y mech, not a Zeus. It just looked similar. And the X mech, it turns out there are no X mechs, so it was an Axman, because I was close enough.
This is Xanthos.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
It wasn't in the. I'm a fool.
You try to blame Megamech, Michael. It's you.
It wasn't in the. No, the mistake was the mech picture for the Y mech, and it wasn't a Zeus. It was a Y mech. I swear.
Okay, Michael. Okay.
Anyways, okay. So, number 5 question that people got the most correct is number 24. When a mech lands a kick, which damage location table is used when determining the hit location? And 81% of people got this correct. Seems reasonable. Yeah, it was a straightforward-ish question.
You got to throw those in there to set up the more confusing, tricky ones, right? Because they're all tricky.
I think this one was tricky because I think they were prone. It was yeah. So it was a kick against a prone mech. Mm-hmm. And 81% of people knew the trick here that you use the full mech table.
Which I didn't know till recently. I thought you'd kick on the punch location table.
The bungles keep coming.
It still makes more sense to me. I'm just imagining someone like frigging clipping their half body through the ground. And so I only see the top half.
Okay, number 4 most correct was question 38 about how does the enhanced flamers rule change the behavior of flamers? And 86% of people knew that. So, I guess you mentioned that, Keith, is like probably a rule that tons of people play with, may not even realize it's an advanced rule.
Yeah, it surprises me actually seeing how that people knew it so well. Because again, it's still an option, and not a lot of people use flamers in any case. But yeah, they seem to have done well.
It just makes sense. It makes them hot and dead. The third most correct question was number 1. What does the GATOR acronym stand for? With a possibly too low 87% as the result.
That's pretty good if you ask me. That's pretty good. Yeah.
It wasn't any one answer, like stole a few responses. I think just different people, didn't know about, like, is it movement or defensive? Is it movement or defensive. Actually, I guess that's all. That was all the answers. Like, did you know correctly whether it was movement or defensive?
Oh yeah,
They're all
opportunity
movement.
modifiers versus other.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we did all right. The second most correct question was number 7, which is when a mech falls, how do you determine its facing? This one, yeah, people probably need to know this to be able to play the game correctly. But I guess you could get through without it. It wouldn't like interfere with the game too much. 90% got it correct with rolling a die 6 and checking the table.
I was disappointed that this was scored so highly because that means that like I'm one of the only people in the world that believed it was like a scatter roll. That just makes that mistake I made that much more comical and embarrassing. Thank you, world, for shaming me.
And then the top question, most correct with 92% correct answers, was the base sequence of phases. Turns out 92% of people correctly play the game. And for the remaining 8%, I don't know what they do differently.
Did any of these questions surprise you, Keith? Like, especially in the order that they're coming? I was sort of surprised that people knew the base sequence of the game, to be 100% honest. I feel like people... Yeah, I was surprised. I don't know. I thought people might do heat after
nine
weapon.
People reported you do physical attacks before weapon attacks.
Oh, well, that's kind of interesting. I'd like to be in the tables of some of these, that's for sure. Although you wonder how many of it's like maybe misclicking or misreading or whatever, but I think that there'd be a minority of these in every case where people actually play that way. You're like, well, what's that even be like?
If you play with a non-standard base sequence, please reach out to us. We want to know more. How does your game work?
It'd be kind of wild to play a game like that, actually.
Anything else on the successful questions, Nathan?
No, I think those are good. Like it's good to see at least that people have like, I mean, especially with, Gator and phases in the game, those are pretty important things to know. And also actually the Zeus question, the honorable mention, because torso facing and like hit direction, all that stuff is a little bit confusing in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that those 3 questions made it in top 5, I mean, well, one of them's in an honorable mention, but they're all pretty high up there in terms of people knowing it. Like those are some good fundamentals to have. So yeah, fundamentals, baby, let's go. Now let's get into the non-fundamentals.
The fun ones. What did people get wrong? There's actually some super interesting questions in here. So the first one is a question that I wrote, which is, so this is number 5 for most incorrect respondents, which was the C3 plus ECM question, where there were 2 lances, each in a C3 network and with an ECM unit that was applying ECM into a radius and figuring out how many of them were in the network. Writing this question was a nightmare. I spent 3 hours on this question because I kept going back and forth and like realizing I did it subtly wrong and then confusing myself about what a 6-hex bubble meant. And eventually I just had to like go into Mega Mech and like trust that the nerds who wrote Mega Mech did it correctly and used them to help work out the correct answer. And then, lay it all out so it could be an actual question. But only 23% of people got this correct. The rest was a fairly even split. There wasn't like one spoiler answer. Lots of people thought all of the units were still hooked up. But the trick here is that one of the lances has a 6 radius ECM that disconnects one of the blue mechs, and one of the red mechs is underwater, and ECM can't, or C3 can't go between above water and below water. So that's the trick. Now you'll know.
I'm not surprised people got that. I mean, I got that wrong. I didn't tell you that. But one of the things you specifically mentioned was as something I think that is only being correct. Yeah, it's only going to be corrected in like the 8th printing of the BMM, which hasn't gone out yet. I have it noted as an errata for the next printing. hell's a bubble? It's not really a technical term now, is it? I mean,
Yeah.
that was the original wording, and I just copied it over to the Battle Mech manual. Not long ago, I did see someone else, not yourself, mention that. I'm like, what defines a bubble?
Yeah.
So I've rewritten that to be an effect radius of 6 hexes. I mean, that still requires you understand the difference between radius and diameter and whatnot. But I mean, it's much more precise than bubbles. So at least that'll be better.
Yeah.
It seems to me like BattleTech has a definitional problem when it comes down to terms that start with B. Bubble and battlefield
And bunker.
and bunker. Oh my god. Pull yourself together, BattleTech.
All right. Number 4 most incorrect question was 46, where a Visigoth aerospace something, I don't know what a Visigoth is, but presumably it has guns because it's strafing an Atlas. And when does the aerospace do its movement? Only 21% got that correct in the movement phase. And this was a bit of like a spoiler answer where 51% of people said in the aerospace movement phase, which does seem like something that would exist, but apparently doesn't.
Yeah, there are separate aerospace phases to deal with things, but that doesn't necessarily mean everything happens precisely in those times.
There's not like a specific aerospace movement phase before the movement phase. It's like different things happen in there, but there's no separate like phase in the overall phase structure for it, right? Which is sort of surprised me actually when I was looking that up. I was surprised too. I would have said aerospace movement phase. I would have got this wrong.
All of you people who got this wrong, don't worry, you're in good company with BungleTech Nathan.
I mean, I plead just I don't use aerospace, so I have to. There is an aerospace movement phase. The movement phase aerospace. I think they always refer to it in Total Warfare, but it's again, it doesn't necessarily work that way. But for me, I'm selecting what I thought was the most obvious stuff, knowing that I didn't really know, and even if I got it right, I would have been feeling guilty because it's for the rules team that we have specialists. So if an answer question comes in that deals with something I don't know, and then you're like, hey, guys who play this aspect of the game that we also have on the rules team, please save me. I don't know what the hell to do here. So we kind of pull in, we have alpha strike specialists and infantry specialists and aerospace specialists. Because pretty much no one person, I would think, at least on our rules team, knows all aspects of the game well enough, not just to play it, but to give useful, official level, complicated rules answers. So we're always batting this back and forth between, I don't know anything about this, passing it on. And for me, that is aerospace. I just don't know it. So we have it's called the Aerospace Cabal. You can see them referenced in the credits of some BattleTech rule books. We're like, thanks to the Aerospace Cabal for testing this and that. And some of those guys are on the rules team, and they deal with all of the aero questions. I just hold up my hands and go, yeah, I don't know.
Playing their own game. So that was a still a respectable 21% of people who were able to get that correctly, maybe just chance. Now at number 3, we start to get into like really low ratios. So only 16% got this one correct. Question number 27. So this was in the rumble seat section, which is actually like, it's supposed to be basic rules, but advanced applications of them. Maybe some optional rules. It's a little bit hazy. But this was number 27 about a horned owl jumping and using a large pulse laser that is stabilized and some medium pulse lasers that are not stabilized. And only 16% got it correct by saying that the other attack modifier was -2 across the board. And 56% thought that it was -2 for the medium pulse laser and -3 for the large pulse laser.
Exactly. And the reason why it is 2 across the board is because stabilized weapons are not stabilized when you jump, or you don't have the benefit when you jump.
Yeah, it's just offsets specifically the running modifier.
Yeah.
I mean, that one I did get right, but that's because I embraced the quirks as soon as they appeared. That was even before I was working with CGL. Just like, hey, these are cool. And I've had to rewrite them, edit them, errata them, transfer them to different books multiple times. So fairly familiar with those, but that's a good example of a tricky question. You think, well, it's stabilized. Surely it works that way. But no, it's a reference to what was it? The mongoose, I think. Yeah, it's a quirk that comes from the mongoose, but specifically mentions that it has in its fluff that it has lasers set to offset that. So we created the quirk out of that fluff that was never meant to apply for jumping for that reason.
It's actually one of my favorite quirks, too. It doesn't seem too overpowerful. It has a specific use. Thematically, it makes sense. Yeah, it's a good design quirk.
Yeah, there's some that are fun, and then there's some that are just broken, of course. Everyone knows narrow, low profile, but yeah, I like the ones that, at most, if you're going to get a to-hit bonus out of it, any kind of target number modifier in your favor, it should at least be situational. I don't feel that, considering how narrow the 2d6 scale is, just flat -1s are too much. I'd like to, in a future revision, cut some of those down and make more like stabilized weapon.
Cool.
And I think this was the question that almost tripped up our one inverse bungler and turned them into a regular bungler.
Yeah. Denham Hardman almost became a human for a moment. But no, he's still a god above us, above the clouds, looking down.
All right. So next one. This one we probably expected a low response, but I am surprised it's this low. Number 43 asked about a minefield of vibro bombs that detonate after 25 tons of pressure, and there's a 60-ton mech that is sprinting towards them. When does the field detonate? I don't know about anyone else, but this is just a bunch of nonsense to me. I would just be randomly guessing. Only 8% of people correctly guessed 4 hexes away. I think that probably everyone just randomly guessed, and so they're like 1, 2, 3, or 4. 2 seems about right. 1 or 3, I can see those. 4 hexes away. That's clearly just the high answer to, round out four answers. But yeah, almost no one got this correct, unsurprisingly.
I was surprised. Fiber bombs have been in the game for a long time. I get that doesn't necessarily translate into people then use it. I mean, look at the also City Tech building rules, but which have been around forever, but are still, I wouldn't say a lot of people play with them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they've been around for a long time. I guess I would have expected more people to use these things. I got it right, but I guess not.
I wonder if maybe maybe it is that they're old and they're cool, but you also have so many other cool things to play with now. So vibro bombs are kind of specific. I know that Nathan has some PTSD from facing some vibro bombs once, but
some of it I suspect is that BattleTech doesn't have a very a standard or very clean sort of way of setting up scenarios, and so it does become difficult to just, how do you even use these? You just buy them, put them on. I think people are less inclined to do more of that weird stuff because BattleTech does tend to encourage a just you and me, let's fight kind of thing.
And if you were going to do a scenario and you're like, oh, we've got some defensive stuff, you might just reach for some standard minefield rules instead.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So number 1 question, most incorrect. Not surprising, but definitely a fun response. And one that when we were writing it, I actually had to message Nathan and be like, is this actually correct? And Nathan assured me it was correct. Number 45, about a winging ground effect aircraft that is flying at flanking speed for 4 hexes at elevation 2, tries to side slip, and then it fails with a margin of 5, and it slides into a level 3 plateau. What happens?
The pilot's name is Steve. It's a Tuesday. It's painted yellow. Yeah.
And a whopping 76% gave the clear and obviously correct answer that it would crash into the plateau, and they were all wrong. The correct answer, with 8%, is that the aircraft stops a single hex after the plateau.
Yeah.
What the heck is happening here?
Finally, a reason to use this vehicle. You side slip, you automatically can go up 1 level for free.
No,
that's crazy.
Be nerfed now. To me,
Nerf the Chronoplan.
Yeah. To me, this just verifies what I thought, is that nobody uses these damn things. Every time I look through there and I'm looking through Total Warfare, there are certain sections which just makes me mad through their very existence. We have so much space here. What is this doing in the core rulebook? How is this not an advanced rule? Get this the hell out of here. Yeah.
This is one of those things where you can immediately tell the age of the game. If this game was written today, there is a 0% chance it would contain wing and ground effect vehicles.
Yeah.
But because it was written in the 80s, it 100% has wing and ground effect vehicles.
Well, even more than that is when Total Warfare specifically was put together. I mean, if you look at the history of game design as a broader thing, there was a trend. I mean, originally it starts out role-playing games. BattleTech is essentially a spin-off of. You got small books, small rules. Here we go. We've just figured out this new thing. Isn't it exciting? Here's your 32-page booklet. It's got everything you need. And then people immediately go, well, no, it doesn't have everything I need. Or people go, okay, I've mastered that. I want more stuff. And then the companies realize there's more to sell. So they release supplements. And then eventually it gets unwieldy. And some of them were bad ideas. And so we make a collected rule book and repeat that process over multiple editions. Each one of those is an edition where we cut out the chaff, add what people like, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And that design trend kind of came to an end around the mid or like 2005 to 2008-ish kind of thing, right around when Total Warfare comes out. Total Warfare is one of those last expressions of that idea of more is better. Gotta get it all in there. Get all the supplements in there. I think like Hero System is another one I think of if you've ever played the Champions RPG. Cram it all in, make the book bigger. That's better. People get more value. But then eventually people realize that, coincidentally, our user base is getting smaller and smaller because there's fewer and fewer people who are interested in 300-page rule books to start a game, which is what it comes into. Our core rule book is 300 pages. And also you start to realize, okay, well, just because it's official, it's usable, doesn't mean people actually like it, that not everything is equal. Mechs are the biggest. Infantry and vehicles next, then everything else gets lower and lower and lower down there. So, yeah, writing philosophy has changed a lot. And I think if Total Warfare had come out even 5 years later, it would have been very different. And also, as an aside, just that CGL fan pro then was so small. Randall has told me once or twice that in some cases we weren't even sure as to how many books we'd be able to put out. And there was a definite, distinct feeling that if we didn't put it in the rulebook, it might not appear. So for instance, we didn't think we'd ever really be able to do an aerospace book again. We got to get it into the main rules, or else it might just not show up. So all of those things have changed now. Definitely the next edition's core rulebook will look very differently than what Total Warfare does, because there's just been so much in the way of shifts in design philosophy.
And wing and ground effect is going to get its whole own supplement to contain those vital rules.
We should actually, Keith, we should get you on the podcast again when the new book is coming out, the new redesigned rules, to highlight like really the big things, the big changes that players need to know going into this new version. Like just talk about the top 10 things, fundamental things. That could be cool.
I'd be happy to do that.
Kill the ignorance right at the source of the ignorance, which is us.
All right. So we also we each had some questions we wanted to talk about that, people accused us of writing badly worded or intentionally misleading questions, and correct, we did, sometimes intentionally. So Nathan, do you want to highlight one of the questions that you wrote that you really wanted to catch people out with?
Yeah, I'll just read one that I think this is an example of me adding information that wasn't necessarily required just to try to confuse you. And I'll read it. It's long. A terrified commando with destroyed left foot and left leg actuators is limping away at its new walking MP modified by -2, after successfully passing the required piloting skill roll of +2 to avoid falling from actuator destruction. As they enter their extraction zone, their dropship pilot's voice is heard on their communication channel. "I'm not getting paid enough to die." Just then, a missile peels in and hits the commando in the same leg, destroying their hip actuator. What is the piloting skill roll number to avoid falling? And how is their already reduced MP further impacted? So this is a lot of information here, but really you could take this to probably as simple as if a commando has its hip actuator hit, what is a piloting skill roll number to avoid falling? And what's their reduced MP? That would give the same answer, but throwing all these other variables that don't actually change anything because the hip actuator being hit actually resets them at this time, that is sort of like the misdirect. And of course, I had to do the MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries reference. I'm not getting paid enough to die. Remember? That was a catapult that shot that missile too. Yeah. So that's an example. And I think our correctness on here, so 31% of people got this correct. The biggest one that people chose was 38%, where they stacked the previous PSRs with the hip actuator. So they gave themselves a +4 PSR instead of a +2. Because once again, the hip seizes when getting hit. So the previous damage from the left foot and left leg actuators are ignored for this PSR. Thank goodness. This is one of the ways that BattleTech sometimes can be slightly kind to you. This is probably one of the only ways, people, so take it. Take that kindness, please.
It's really confusing rules-wise, and there are a lot of questions on it. But you can see the tent is clear. I mean, they even mentioned it offhand in a section in TAC Ops. They're like, the reason we did this is because we wanted to be kinder to people. But it confuses the hell out of people. There's got to be better ways to do it. Mm-hmm. So we're definitely looking at that because, I mean, you can see just exactly. Yeah, I mean, I already knew it did because there's a whole bunch of rules questions on the forums about I don't understand the hip thing. Can someone explain the hip thing? Because it's the only rule, the only critical BattleTech that has chronological damage tracking. You have to know when that hit occurs precisely, and the hits of any other thing in that leg before and after. The whole leg has to be tracked critically, chronologically, or else you can't apply the rule correctly. And that people just mess that up, right? And that's just extra tracking. I hate it. I hate the rules so much. I look forward to firing into space very soon.
I like the hatred we're getting through on this podcast, Keith. The trauma of being a rule master in charge of the rules. You're hearing it first here, people.
Yeah, there are some things I can always tell basically if a rule was, I wouldn't say bad, but that's my initial reaction. But if I had to add more text to it when making the Battle Mech Manual, like normally Battle Mech Manual was about cutting down text size because Total Warfare and stuff was very conversational. It's like, if you happen to be doing this, and then anyways, you would have to there's a lot of modifiers, unnecessary stuff, makes the sentences long. But you can do that, but sometimes there's just, this rule is confusing. It's not worded enough. You need more text. You need more examples. You gotta fill it out. And so there were definitely sections that needed more. I believe the hip was one of them. Ammunition explosions, criticals. There was some stuff that just we weren't doing a good enough job of adding the examples that needed. But some stuff, it needs to be that complex. Hip is not one of those things, I think.
So if you got this question wrong, don't feel bad.
No,
you didn't fail. The rules failed you.
And Michael, you had one that you thought was misdirecting too.
Yeah, I remember this one because I'm pretty sure we actually, like, you wrote the bulk of the questions, and then I sort of went through and reviewed the majority of them. And this is one that I think we argued about for quite a while we were editing and writing these. And quite a few people seem to have been misdirected. A few people commented afterwards to be like, I think you did this wrong, but I'm pretty sure we did this right. I'm almost certain we did this right. And it's question number 4 about a Jenner 2C traveling through a depth 0 water hex into a depth 1 water hex, and then into a depth 0 water hex, and then into a level 1 hex. And how many pilot skill rolls do they have to make? The correct answer is 1 for entering the depth 1 water hex, but people were variously misdirected. Only 34% got that right, and then 42% said it was 2 rolls, and 20% said it was 3 rolls. And people even answered after the fact to be like, actually, you should roll for every water hex. But it's every water hex of depth 1 or greater.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have expected that. Water is really common. We've seen it on the core BattleTech map, even BattleTech, the map. I mean, it's been around forever. I don't think the rules have changed on that. So I'm surprised that people were thinking depth 0 meant more than it did.
Yeah, I think that it's just, people got it in their head that like we don't remember to do a lot of like water rolls when we should. And so they just apply that to all water, but like what even is depth 0 water?
Yeah,
like
depth 0 is largely cosmetic. It's just, this looks pretty. It might.
Yeah.
I think there's actually even a debate on this that we haven't actually gotten around to settling. But I think the only thing that might matter is that it is technically then not clear terrain. So if you had infantry in depth 0 water, they're not counting as in the open to get that punishing double damage for being in a clear hex. That's the only thing I can think of where it comes out as relevant, which is not necessarily. There might be more, but off the top of my head, that's all I'm getting.
One other thing that I know matters is in rain, because after light rain, it becomes mud after a certain amount of hexes or a certain amount of turns. So that's the only other thing that comes to mind for me. And everybody loves mud, so you need more mud. Right? I love mud. Mud baths, mech baths.
I'll take your word for it. I don't know the rule. All right. So that's sort of, that runs us through the bulk of the answers and the results. Were there a few questions we wanted to pull up and highlight and talk any more about?
The only thing that I want to mention is that one question that I was interested in was the Highlander question regarding it taking its arm being blown off and then rolling for internal structure damage or not rolling for internal structure damage when you roll for your critical damage. And this is what we covered in the previous episode and mentioned in this podcast as well today, the Omega Bungle, which is the bungle that I think most people are making just because of sort of the contradiction between how people interpret the current flowchart in the BMM and Total Warfare in comparison to actually what's listed in the steps. It's really an interpretational issue as I understand it, but basically 46% of people said that you fully resolve the damage coming in before you do the crit chance. But really, as the damage is coming in, as soon as the arm blows off, you pause the damage resolution, do the crit chance, and then resolve the remainder of the damage. And this is a difference that won't matter like 95% of the time, but 5% of the time with specific mechs, for example, a Highlander with a Gauss rifle, in that situation, it does actually change the game quite a lot, and it could be the result. No mech destruction to complete mech destruction, dependent on the situation of the mech at the time. So I was, surprised. So like I said, 24% of people got it right. 46% of people said it the common way. And this is the thing that Mega Mech, once again, does correct. Mega Mech does not make the Omega Bungle. So interesting to see that it was still present here.
We're not just surprised, but we're also disappointed, listeners. We come out here every month. We try to instill knowledge in you, and, it's just not getting through to you. You're still resolving your criticals after your damage.
What about the people that learned from us? That's what we got to find out. Let's look up that data really quick. The people that learned from us specifically, were they better average on this question than other people?
I suspect the answer is no, but give me one quick moment. We're running the numbers.
Run the numbers, man. I expect it's going to be yes. I expect that everyone who learned from us got it correct.
It's not a rule, like you said, that comes up very often, but it's almost, you might almost call it the Gauss rifle rule, because then you have something that has so many explosive slots that there is a decent chance that when you destroy a location, that roll will hit one of those exploding locations. So often there's one ammo slot in there, you're going to miss it. Doesn't matter. But the Gauss rifle comes up again and again.
Yeah. And this one, to me, sort of feels unintuitive. It's probably the only instance in which you pause damage resolution, right? Like,
yeah,
you never say, okay, only 7 damage. Now I do this. Now the rest of the damage comes through, right? It's like, this is like, even if it's with SRMs, it's individual damage groupings you resolve, then you do the crit, resolve, then you do the crit. But this is like something different. It's very unique.
We did look, I mean, as an aside for just sort of the process of trying to figure out what rules are good and what rules are bad. We did run some test games getting rid of that. People didn't like it. Despite the fact no one likes the rule as it is, they often skip over it or whatever. The people who do know it really like it because it does give you that chance. And there was also this feeling that, okay, say there's 1 point left in the location. I get that chance to, I caused a crit. I get that chance to maybe blow up the ammo. But if I do one more point and carry on to the next, then I lose it. You know, if you're playing without that rule, it didn't feel good to people. So despite that being on the initial list of maybe something we could cut for simplification, we did wind up looking to keep it because it's something, again, that has a subtle, at least reading it, subtle effect, but in play, it's kind of obvious what it does.
Yeah. It does make sense that it feels good if you got that on someone.
The numbers are just coming through now. And by the sphere, the people who did the best on this question were those who were born with an innate understanding. Obviously, there's no competition. But right behind them are the people who learned everything they know from us. 33% of them got this correct.
There we go.
And then friends taught me read the manual, only 23%. And distantly last, people who play at the game store, only 13% of them got this answer correct.
Man, game stores got to step up their game.
In Total Warfare, it's actually buried in a full page flip over, separate from the rest of all of the critical information. There's this little destroyed location subparagraph elsewhere. It's very easy to miss if you're using TW.
We can't beat innate knowledge.
You can't. Yeah, no, we can't.
But my God, does that feel good? We're making a difference, Michael. We're making a difference.
For those 6 people. we take it all back. We're proud of you, bunglers. We're so proud of you. Our little Kodamas, you're learning. You may know nothing else about the game. You did better on this question than you did the rest of the test.
This is a great question, though, because that means that this is like an actually that our people that learn from us can do at the table. Actually, you have to pause the damage going through. And we want to empower our players by being able to say, actually. So this is great.
They don't know what gator means, but they do know how to correctly resolve critical mid-damage.
It's great. It's great. So that's all our data. This has been a long conversation, almost 2 hours. Amazing.
Yeah.
So how do we feel about this experience? Is there anything that we really learned, anything that popped out that we haven't talked about yet that we want to mention?
I was thinking about even what does it mean to have optional rules? I mean, some games, it's a very straightforward thing. Here's a small package of reasonably play tested, but there's clear downsides to them. The reasons that the designers didn't put them into the main book. You can often even see it in those manuals. We know this adds a lot of complexity, so it's not in the rule, but there's nothing wrong with the rule per se. It's just going to make your game take a lot longer. BattleTech does not do that. BattleTech is so weird in a lot of ways, and this is one of them. Instead, it's, we have some horribly time-consuming stuff in core. Do you like skidding and working out timing interactions? Here you go. But floating crits, no, that's optional. But a lot of our optional rules are just, wouldn't this be neat? Like TAC Ops was very specifically, let's read through a lot of the novels and just things randomly people want, and we'll just make rules for them. There's all sorts of stuff that appears.
Yep.
And the standard rules don't modify that. Let's just start making stuff up. And a lot of it's not play tested. Some of it's outright contradictory. Some of it is just ridiculous. You would never want to do this. But whatever, we just made it and we threw it in there. And it's just not a coherent, holistic system. Some of it is clearly better than other stuff. It's so different.
The most obvious example to me is the engine explosion section, where
the stack pull,
like it literally in TAC Ops describes how engines don't explode because they wouldn't do that. We knew that when we wrote the game, but there are a bunch of books out there now that have fusion engines exploding, and it's kind of cool. So here's the rules for if you want your engines to explode.
Or the jump jet attack. We need to be able to roast Natasha Kerensky in her cockpit with jump jets, even though this rule really very, very low chance of actually using the rule as written to do that. But whatever, it's there. We have a rule for it now. That was even the catchphrase. Yeah, we got a rule for that.
Kind of like in like tabletop role playing games, you've got the core rules for stuff, and then you sort of trust the game master to be able to support. What if I want to do some weird cool thing that's not in the rules, and you just like eyeball it? But BattleTech's not really a GM'd game. It can be GM'd, but it's not really a GM'd game. So instead, all those cool things became optional rules. Every neat thing you can think of.
BattleTech is clearly derived from the role-playing world and has a lot of role-playing elements, but that is one place where it completely takes a separate direction. No, we can't rely on a GM to just wing it and arbitrate it fairly. This is competitive. I need to know how I'm going to roast you in your cockpit on a Tuesday on low gravity with a storm during magma. Like, we got to be able to lay it out neutrally. And so there's a lot of stuff that's, well, frankly, silly and pointless. But yeah, it's so different than so many other games. I just find that really interesting. So when you then in turn design a survey based on asking people about these rules and their knowledge of it, well, a lot of them aren't going to do it because they're going to go, why would I ever play this stuff? Of course I don't know it. BattleTech's like, I think of like the salad bar analogy, right? You go up there and there's all of this stuff, and like, I don't like all of this. I'm not going to that tray. I'm going to this one. You can pick and choose all the different stuff you want. There's so much in the way of options that it's going to result in so many different user experiences, so many different ideas of what is BattleTech for player X versus player Y.
And I think that's perhaps something that is instilled in the BattleTech blood, that when we sweat out there in community, brings out the stench of play how you want to play, and, everybody's welcome. Because basically it's built into the system. There's literally these books on optional rules that you can slot in if you want. And people play things thinking they're not optional, they're real, or vice versa. The system's like sort of made to be customized to you based on sort of, wouldn't this be cool? Wouldn't this like perspective be cool to catch? Sort of neat.
And then someone shows up at the table with their 1/500 scale Soviet era chronoplan, and they want to make sure there's wing and ground effect rules for them to be able to play. And we got that.
Not for long if Keith has his way.
No, you can't cut anything. That's the thing, right? They don't like it when you take stuff away. But you got to figure out, does it belong in the core rule book? We need to know, that's it. I play this stuff all the time. We got to be able to look this up right now, even if it gets in the way of me referencing how to do a DFA.
The best attack.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, by far.
We actually had a super interesting DFA line of sight consideration that was game changing in our previous game that we're going to cover for the battlefield outcome report today. But I'll leave that as a moment of suspense for our listeners. But it's friggin' intense.
I'll have to make sure I listen to that segment so I can understand what happened.
It was something that literally was clarified in Total Warfare, but wasn't clarified in the BMM. And it's regarding what the height level of the mech jumping in is considered for line of sight purposes. And that's such a weird niche thing, but it really mattered in a game because we're playing a game with like towers that were monitoring you. So if they saw you do specific actions, you were penalized. And anyhow, we'll go into the next segment.
Later printings. If you've got the later ones, it's clear. But yeah, it was vague in earlier ones compared to TW.
Oh, maybe we... Yeah, I should check that.
If it's still vague, I want to hear about it later. So I can put in yet more errata. But
maybe, yeah, the one I had it wasn't contained because it wasn't referenced. Or maybe it is weird. It is weird. Maybe, I don't know. I never know when my books are accurate or not, man. I just pull them out. Like, let's go with the books. I need there's such a thing to be said for electronic copies, right? So you can always have something more up to date.
I definitely have a skewed viewing of how the rules are because I always have the newest stuff and I keep up on errata because I have to. It's what I do. But always have to remember this. People like, I bought the first printing of this. To me, it's the same book. What is the cover arts may be different, but it still has the same title. What do you mean there's 1,000 corrections or whatever the hell if you have tac ops or something? A lot of other games would just say, here's a revised edition or a new edition, and we just keep iterating.
That is actually something, if we do a test again, we should actually ask that question. It'd be interesting to see if rule mistakes or knowledge of the game changed, dependent on if people used physical rule books or electronic rule books, like actually how they were engaging with the rules.
Demand people go and check what printing they have of each of their books, and
we're not going that far, Michael, okay? People already sped through this in 5 minutes. We can't get them to do that as well. That's too much.
Well, we appreciate all of you. Thank you for being a part of this. We hope at least some of you had fun, I guess.
There's a rousing. I think you had fun.
I think we should just close with NC Kestrel's statement again. That was miserable. Why did I do this? Let's just end it with that. Thank you, everyone who took the test, though. As we know, cancer was not cured because of this test, and I'm sure, we'll get it next year unless we run a test again, then it's going to happen again. But it has been fun. We've learned a lot, and just love to see the engagement and people having fun with it. And obviously, a big thank you to Michael for doing all the data analysis, because we can actually trust what was said today.
100% guaranteed and scientifically valid.
And more importantly, perhaps, or equally importantly, at least, Keith, thank you so much for being here and spending time with us and answering our questions when I message you stupid questions all the time, which I do, I know. And just for being such an ambassador for the BattleTech community and being willing to spend the time to chat with us about this today and actually being interested in it and everything. It's just amazing to have you here, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for the invite. It was a lot of fun. Happy to be on.
All right, everybody. Well, with that note, we are on to our next segment.
This is Professor Michael presenting The Sphere We Live In. Autoignition is the property of certain materials to spontaneously ignite without a spark. In general, we think of materials igniting when introduced to something with enough energy to begin combustion, such as a flame, spark, or impact. But at high enough temperatures, the activation energy can be reached with no further input. This fact is of vital importance for MechWarriors, as different munitions have different autoignition points. In general, larger munitions require more potent propellants, which have lower autoignition temperatures and as such will cook off first in high heat situations. Now you know about the sphere we live in.
Tertiary Objective, Battlefield Outcome Report segment. Initiating.
This is Nathaniel Smithson with Iron and Boots on the Ground in the studio, reviewing the controversial footage from a recent Johnston Industries prototype test. Allegations of misconduct have been aimed at Nimakachi Fusion Products Limited after Johnston Industries test pilot alleges that during an open-field mech trial, a Nimakachi Spider pilot broke the conventions of the test and completed a dangerous death-from-above maneuver on them that nearly crippled their mech and another fellow test pilots. The Nimakachi pilot has countered this accusation, saying they were simply completing an advanced jumping maneuver that the Johnston pilot, in their words, must have got shook from due to a piloting skill issue. Footage from the monitoring towers gives us something to speculate on, and this, of course, is an Iron and Boots on the Ground exclusive. Now, for your eyes, viewers. And there you have it. A spider jumps behind a plateau. The noise of some sort of collision, and an Axman plummets out from behind that same plateau. What are your thoughts, viewers? A treacherous act of poor sportsmanship, or the bungling reactions of an overwhelmed pilot? We'll leave it to you with a live poll now on your screens. Again, this has been Nathaniel Smithson with INN Boots on the Ground. Always first on the scene.
So, what happened? A spider landed a DFA with an extremely precise placement to avoid being penalized. And how did it happen? In our game mode prototype Clash, units fight to complete objectives on the battlefield while being tracked by monitoring towers. If units are seen attacking one another, the attacking unit is penalized. In the game, an Axman was standing adjacent to a level 2 hill, hiding from a level 3 monitoring tower a few hexes away. In front of the Axman, however, was a level 2 hill with a level 6 wall adjacent to it that blocked line of sight to the tower. This unique placement presented a spider with an opportunity to land a DFA attack on the Axman while staying out of sight of the monitoring tower. This is possible, as when line of sight to a unit doing a DFA is determined, the DFAing unit is counted as being in the hex adjacent to its target. This means even though the spider was at level 6 before landing the DFA, and landed on a mech requiring the spider to have a height level of at least 4 to land on, and that anything above level 2 in the hex he was landing on would have been detected by the monitoring tower. Because line of sight is determined in the hex adjacent to the target, this resulted in the spider landing a DFA, well, not technically being visible to the monitoring tower. An extremely subtle terrain placement that resulted in the key difference between a game-losing decision or a game-winning moment.
This is Professor Michael presenting The Sphere We Live In. Similar to the stabilization systems in Tridio cameras, BattleMech weapon stabilization has evolved for centuries. Starting from dampened hardpoints and braced mounts, centrally mounted weapon systems were often found to be more accurate during movement than peripherally mounted systems. Certain modern mechs even make use of autonomous, actuated, and gyroscopic mounts, which can make immediate fine-grain adjustments to weapons, allowing for more accurate shots on the move than the main combat computer can manage on its own. Notably, however, the chaotic, pseudo-random activation pulses of jump jets when maintaining mech flight stability actually interfere with both active and passive stabilization of weapons due to their non-linear dynamical nature. Now you know about the sphere we live in.
And that brings us to an end of another deployment of BungleTech. In closing, allow me to quickly share the words of wisdom passed our way by our very own technician Klint.
As one of the clan's technicians, I assure you that the machine gun ammo is perfectly safe to mount in the head. The head does not get shot often, and if it does, the pilot is probably dead anyway. And if the pilot lives, the machine gun ammo explosion can eject the pilot to safety.
Straight from the mouth of a Clan Kodama technician. Take it to the Comstar Bank. As always, you can find us via Discord, email, Twitter, and Patreon, all linked in the description. Thank you all for your continued viewership, sharing, and support. Until next time, MechWarriors. Good fortunes on the battlefield. Selah.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.